in the heart of the African wilderness, where the acacia trees paint stark silhouettes against a vast, unforgiving sky, and life and death dance an eternal, often brutal, rhythm, an orphan lion cub lay crying beside the still form of its mother. Its tiny, desperate mews were almost swallowed by the immense silence of the plains, a fragile sound against the backdrop of an indifferent nature. A wildlife biologist, Sarah, would stumble upon this scene of profound loss, and the choice she made that day would ripple through years, culminating in an encounter that would leave her utterly shaken, tears streaming down her face, not from sorrow, but from an emotion so potent it defied simple definition. What that lion did, years after she saved its life, is a testament to bonds that sometimes, miraculously, transcend the boundaries of species. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that kindness, in its purest form, can indeed exist in the wild, perhaps even bridge the gap between human and animal, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that touch the soul. The cub, barely weeks old, was a speck of tawny fur against the parched earth, its future as bleak as the vultures beginning to circle high above. Its mother, a magnificent lioness, was gone, her powerful body now just a tragic monument. For the cub, this was the precipice of an ending. But the wilderness, in its harsh beauty, sometimes offers unexpected threads of connection, and one, almost invisible yet incredibly strong, was about to be woven. The story of Sarah and this cub, a journey from desolation to an unbelievable reunion, began on a searing afternoon under the African sun. Sarah was a seasoned field biologist, her life dedicated to understanding and protecting the delicate ecosystems of the savanna. Her days were spent tracking prides, monitoring populations, and sometimes intervening when human activity threatened the natural order. She knew this land, its rhythms, its dangers, and its heart-wrenching beauty as intimately as the lines on her own hands. She'd seen much in her years, the raw power of a hunt, the tender care of a mother for her young, the stark finality of death. But some scenes still had the power to stop her heart. On this particular day, she was driving a familiar route along the edge of the Kalahari Plains, a vast expanse that shimmered under the oppressive heat of the dry season. The air was thick with dust, and the usually vibrant landscape was muted in tones of ochre and brown. Water was scarce, and the animals were stressed, their movements dictated by the desperate search for sustenance. Sarah was noting the condition of a small herd of wildebeest, their ribs showing starkly, when a particular stillness in a copse of thorny acacia trees caught her eye. It wasn't the stillness of peace, but the heavy, unnerving silence that often accompanies tragedy. A faint, almost inaudible sound drifted on the hot breeze, a high-pitched, weak cry that pricked at her senses. It was a sound that spoke of utter vulnerability. She cut the engine of her Land Rover, the sudden quiet amplifying the cub's distressed calls. Cautiously, she disembarked, her binoculars already raised. Her heart sank as the scene came into focus. A lioness lay stretched out on her side, unnaturally still, and nestled against her cooling flank, trying to nuzzle for milk, was a tiny cub, no bigger than a house cat, its mewling cries a desperate plea to a mother who would never respond. The distant, yelping calls of hyenas, still far off but unmistakable, sent a chill down Sarah's spine despite the baking heat. A lone vulture, then another, began a slow, patient spiral in the sky above, dark omens against the brassy blue. The savanna, for all its breathtaking vistas, could be an achingly lonely place to die, and an even lonelier place for an orphan to be born into such immediate loss. The heat was already becoming a palpable enemy, and the cub, exposed and alone, was a fragile beacon of life in a landscape that preyed on weakness. Sarah approached slowly, her movements measured, her presence intended to be as unthreatening as possible. The cub, sensing her approach, tried to hiss, a miniature imitation of its mother's formidable defense, but it was a sound lost in its own fear and desolation. She knelt a respectful distance from the lioness. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no wounds from a fight. Perhaps a snake bite, or a sudden, virulent illness. The wild held many unseen dangers. The lioness was lean, but not emaciated, suggesting the crisis had been swift. Sarah's professional training kicked in, assessing the situation, but her gaze kept returning to the cub, whose cries were now weakening, its tiny body trembling. It was far too young to survive alone. Without its mother's milk and protection, it would succumb to starvation, dehydration, or predation within days, if not hours. The rules of non-intervention in the wild were strict, born from a deep respect for natural processes. But there were exceptions, rare and carefully considered, for situations where humanity's impact had already skewed the balance, or when a life, especially one so young and blameless, faced certain, agonizing demise without a flicker of hope. The cub's eyes, a milky blue, were barely open. It pushed its small head against its mother's fur, a heartbreakingly futile gesture. Sarah knew the statistics. Lion cub mortality was high even with a mother and a pride. Alone, its chances were zero. The hyenas would be here by nightfall, drawn by the scent of death, and the cub would be an easy, tragic meal. Her mind raced. Leaving it was unthinkable, a betrayal of the very compassion that had drawn her to this work. Taking it was a monumental decision, fraught with complications, the logistics of care, the ethics of raising a wild animal, the slim chances of successful reintroduction. Yet, looking at that tiny, shivering creature, fighting for a life it had barely begun, the protocols and scientific detachment began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, almost maternal instinct to protect. The first test was simply getting near. The cub, despite its weakness, flinched and tried to retreat further into its mother's unyielding side when Sarah extended a tentative hand. The sun climbed higher, intensifying the heat, and the cub's shallow, rapid breaths were a clear sign of distress. Her water bottle, carried for her own hydration, suddenly seemed like a lifeline. The tension was a palpable thing, thick as the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. The cub was growing visibly weaker, its cries fading to whimpers. Sarah watched, her heart aching, as the tiny creature licked at the dry, unresponsive teats of its mother. The circling vultures were now lower, their shadows occasionally flicking across the tragic scene. Time was running out. She knew she couldn't just watch. Slowly, carefully, she uncapped her water bottle and poured a little into her cupped palm, extending it towards the cub. It recoiled at first, fear overriding thirst. Sarah remained still, speaking in a low, gentle voice, words of comfort that the cub couldn't understand but whose tone, she hoped, might soothe. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The distant calls of the hyenas seemed a fraction closer. She could almost feel the oppressive weight of the savannah, waiting. She tried again with the water, her hand steady. The cub, its tiny nose twitching, seemed to catch the scent. Hesitantly, it stretched its neck, and then, a tiny, rough tongue flicked out, tasting the moisture. It was a small victory, but monumental. It lapped weakly, the effort clearly taxing its waning strength. Sarah refilled her palm, again and again, until the cub turned its head away, its immediate thirst quenched. She had a small, clean cloth in her pack. Wetting it, she gently dabbed at the cub's face, cleaning away some of the dust and grime. It was so small, so fragile, its ribs like tiny bird bones beneath her fingers. The decision solidified in her heart. She couldn't leave it. She would take it. This was not just an act of rescue. It was a commitment, a heavy responsibility. With infinite care, Sarah used her bush knife to cut away some of the tougher acacia branches, fashioning a makeshift, shaded spot nearby. Then came the most difficult part, separating the cub from its mother. As she gently tried to lift it, the cub let out a surprisingly strong, distressed cry and clung to its mother's fur with tiny, needle-sharp claws. It was a moment of profound grief, even for Sarah, a stranger to this intimate family tragedy. She spoke to it softly, reassuringly, her voice thick with emotion. "It's okay, little one. I'll help you. I promise." Eventually, its grip loosened, perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps from a dawning, instinctual understanding that this new presence might offer warmth, if not the comfort of its mother. She wrapped the cub in the spare shirt from her pack, its small body surprisingly light, yet feeling like the weight of the world. She took one last look at the lioness, a silent promise passing between them that she would do everything in her power for this tiny survivor. As she walked back to her vehicle, the cub cradled against her chest, a lone hyena, bolder than the others, had approached the edge of the clearing, its eyes fixed on the scene. Sarah stared it down, her resolve hardening, before quickly getting into the Land Rover. The drive back to her research camp was a blur of anxiety and burgeoning hope. The cub, nestled in its makeshift bed on the passenger seat, was quiet now, its breathing shallow but regular. The immediate danger of the open savanna was behind them, but the fight for its life had only just begun. Back at her small, rustic research station, the real work started. Sarah named the cub Tao, meaning lion in Setswana, a name that felt both strong and hopeful. Tao was critically dehydrated and malnourished. Sarah, with her veterinary knowledge, knew he needed specialized care. She had some basic supplies, But a lion cub this young required a specific formula, round-the-clock feeding, and constant warmth. The first few days were touch and go. Tao was listless, refusing the bottle at first. Sarah patiently persisted, using a syringe to gently drip milk into his mouth, a few drops at a time. She kept him warm with hot water bottles wrapped in blankets, simulating the heat of his mother's body. She barely slept, her small tent transformed into a neonatal intensive care unit. Every small improvement was a cause for quiet celebration. The first time Tao suckled properly from the bottle, the first time his tiny purr rumbled against her hand, a sound like a miniature motor. There were setbacks. One night, Tao developed a fever, his small body hot and trembling. Sarah feared the worst, thinking of all the infections a vulnerable cub could succumb to. She administered a mild antibiotic she had on hand for emergencies, her heart heavy with worry, and spent the night sponging him with cool water, murmuring words of encouragement. By morning, the fever had broken, and Tao looked at her with slightly brighter eyes, taking his milk with a renewed, albeit weak, vigor. The experience shook Sarah, deepening her awareness of how precarious his life was, and how much she had come to care for this tiny, fierce creature. As weeks turned into months, Tao grew. His milky blue eyes slowly transformed into the keen, amber gaze of a young lion. His fur thickened, his paws became comically oversized, and his playful instincts began to emerge. He would stalk Sarah's boots, pouncing with an endearing lack of coordination, his baby teeth too small to do any harm. He batted swaying grass stems and chased butterflies in the small, secure enclosure Sarah had built for him near her tent. He was a creature of boundless curiosity and burgeoning strength. Sarah became his world, his source of food, warmth, play, and comfort. He would greet her with enthusiastic chirps and head rubs, his sandpaper tongue a rough caress on her hand. The bond between them was undeniable, a deep, affectionate connection forged in those early days of desperation and care. Sarah knew, however, that this idyllic arrangement couldn't last. Tao was a wild animal, not a pet. Her goal had always been to give him a chance at a life as natural as possible. Keeping him with her indefinitely was not fair to him, nor was it ethically sound. He needed to learn to be a lion, to interact with his own kind. Releasing him directly back into the wild from her care was impossible. He lacked the survival skills his mother would have taught him. The only viable option was a reputable wildlife sanctuary, one that specialized in rehabilitating and providing long-term care for animals like Tao, ideally with the possibility of integration into a pride within a large, naturalistic enclosure. The decision to send him away was one of the hardest Sarah ever had to make. She researched sanctuaries meticulously, finally choosing one known for its excellent care standards and conservation ethics, several hundred miles away. The day Tao left, he was a robust, handsome young lion, nearly a year old, full of playful energy. He looked back at her from his transport crate, his amber eyes questioning, and Sarah had to fight back tears. It felt like sending a child off to boarding school, a mixture of pride, sorrow, and hope. She knew it was the right thing, the best thing for him, but the silence in her camp that night was deafening. She received occasional updates from the sanctuary. Tao was adapting well, showing interest in other young lions, growing into a magnificent adolescent. Life on the savannah continued, with its cycles of birth and death, struggle and survival. Sarah continued her work, the memory of Tao a warm ember in her heart. Years passed. 5, to be exact. Sarah's work had taken her to different regions, different projects. The sanctuary where Tao lived was far from her usual operational areas. But she had never forgotten him, the tiny, mewling cub she had held against her heart. An opportunity arose for her to attend a conservation conference near the sanctuary. On a free afternoon, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, she arranged a visit. She wasn't sure what to expect. Would Tao even be recognizable? He would be a fully grown adult lion now. Would there be any flicker of recognition if he saw her? Or would she just be another human face, insignificant to a king of beasts now living among his own kind? The sanctuary was vast, sprawling acres of recreated savanna, dotted with rocky outcrops and watering holes, designed to mimic a natural lion habitat as closely as possible. A senior warden, aware of Sarah's connection to Tao, agreed to escort her to the large enclosure where Tao now lived with a small pride. As they approached the heavy-gauge fencing, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, resting in the shade of a large marula tree, was a magnificent male lion, his mane thick and golden, his body powerful and regal. He was immense, every inch the apex predator, The warden, pointing, said quietly, "That's him. That's Tao." Sarah stood at the fence line, her hands gripping the wire mesh, her gaze fixed on the lion. He was sleeping, his massive chest rising and falling rhythmically. He looked so different, so wild, so complete. Could this truly be the tiny, fragile creature she had nursed back to life? The warden explained that Tao had integrated well, though he always maintained a certain gentle aloofness, a quiet confidence. He wasn't aggressive, but he was undoubtedly the dominant male in this particular group. Sarah waited, her heart a drum against her ribs. She didn't call out his name, unsure if it would mean anything to him now, or if it would disturb him. She just watched, a flood of memories washing over her, the desperate cries, the first tentative lick of water, the playful pounces, the warmth of his small body curled up beside her. After what felt like an age, Tao stirred. He stretched languidly, a ripple of muscle under his tawny coat, and then his head came up. His amber eyes, so like the one she remembered but now set in a mature, powerful face, scanned his surroundings. They passed over Sarah without lingering, and her heart sank a little. Of course, why would he remember? It had been so long. He was a wild animal, living a lion's life. She was just a ghost from a distant past. She was about to turn away, a lump forming in her throat, a mixture of pride in the magnificent animal he had become and a quiet sadness at the severance of their bond. But then, Tao's head turned back. His gaze, casual at first, seemed to lock onto hers. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture she remembered so vividly from his cubhood when he was curious or puzzled. He rose, slowly, deliberately, and began to walk towards the fence where Sarah stood. Her breath hitched. The warden beside her tensed slightly, a hand resting near the tranquilizer gun on his belt, a standard precaution. But Tao's demeanor was not threatening. It was intent. He approached the fence, his massive head just feet away from her, separated only by the strong wire. He stopped, his golden eyes fixed on Sarah's face. And then he did something that shattered her composure and brought tears streaming down her cheeks. He let out a soft, low sound, a chuffing rumble deep in his chest. It wasn't a roar, not a growl of aggression, but a sound she remembered distinctly, the specific, gentle greeting he used to make as a cub when she approached him, a sound of recognition, of contentment, perhaps even affection in his own lion way. He then rubbed his great head against the fence, right where her hands were, a gesture so reminiscent of his cub days, seeking comfort and connection. His eyes, looking into hers, were soft, a deep, knowing amber. Sarah was overwhelmed. Tears flowed freely, blurring her vision of the magnificent lion before her. They were tears of disbelief, of joy, of a profound, almost sacred connection reaffirmed. He remembered. After all these years, after growing into the king of his domain, some part of him, deep within, remembered the human who had saved him, who had been his mother, his protector, his first pride. He stayed there for several long moments, his presence calm and powerful, his occasional soft rumbles a conversation only they could understand. The warden watched in stunned silence, visibly moved by the interaction. He had seen many things in his years at the sanctuary, but a bond like this, enduring across time and the vast chasm between species, was rare and extraordinary. Eventually, Tao drew back, gave one last, lingering look at Sarah, then turned and padded majestically back towards the shade of the Mariula tree, rejoining the other lions who had been watching from a distance with mild curiosity. The moment was over, but its impact on Sarah would last a lifetime. She stood there for a long while, her tears slowly subsiding, replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe and gratitude. The tiny cub she had rescued from certain death had not only survived but thrived, and he had carried a memory of her, a spark of their shared past, in his wild heart. The wilderness, which had shown her its harshest face on the day she found Tao, had now revealed its capacity for profound, unexpected tenderness. The connection was unbroken. And as Sarah finally turned to leave, her heart full, she knew that some bonds, forged in moments of crisis and nurtured with selfless care, could indeed transcend anything. The sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and for Sarah, the world felt a little more magical, a little more hopeful, because a lion remembered. Thanks for watching. If this story touched you, if you felt that incredible bond across the years and species, give it a like and subscribe for more wild moments of wonder that remind us of the deep connections that thread through all life on this planet.